can't even, you're not even in there. Tonight we're talking about two of our West Pittston artists, Robert Carlyle Barritt and Charles Burritt Zimmerman. Both of these young men grew up in West Pittston and were part of the community. The one thing that impresses me is the level of training that they had. Despite, you know, coming from little old West Pittston, they really were spending time at some of the best art schools in the country. And I am Mary Portali from the Historical Society. These gentlemen are just two of the local artists. There have been many, many self-trained artists in West Pittston. These fellows, of course, had some professional training. We're hoping to do another program at some point on Francis Brackett, who was the artist who painted the painting over the auditorium in the old high school building on Montgomery Avenue. For those of you that attended school there, you might remember that painting. And we know a lot about it. We know a lot about him, and I'm hoping to do a program over there at some point. So we'll keep that in mind for the future. Barritt and Zimmerman were born right around the turn of the century, about around 1900. They were about 5 years apart in age. I've never come across anything that indicates they knew each other, but I suspect they must have. They grew up about the same time. They would have attended the same schools. They, in fact, had just similar subjects that they would have painted, and especially when in their later years they were both members of the Wyoming Valley Art League. So I'm sure they knew each other at some point.
We knew.
Oh, you knew? Oh, wow.
Mr. Zimmerman, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so happy that you're here.
I've with him a few times. He used to have classes.
And that's one of the things I learned about him, was that he did teach at some point.
Yeah.
Did any of you study with him at some point?
Not personally, but he would do classes with some of us.
Like group
classes.
classes.
And you could paint, and then he correct your paintings and all. So.
Wow. Well, when we get to him, I'm going to ask you some more. Absolutely. Oh, I'm sure. I am sure. Okay. This is a picture of Robert Carlyle Barritt. He generally didn't use the Robert. He kind of just went by Carlyle. And that's a later picture of him. His landscapes have been, his actual painting style has been known as Pennsylvania Impressionist, which honestly, as an artist myself, I hadn't heard of that until I did the research for this. But Pennsylvania Impressionism. And he is well known for portraits as well. Landscapes, portraits, for the most part, are what he did. And he a lot of times did paintings of people that he knew, that he encountered in his life. And occasionally people in the community would commission him to do artworks.
I don't want to interrupt you. I know.
He started out living in Pittston on Mill Street. That was his childhood home about 125 years ago. And it was just up the street from the family's business. The business was down right on Main Street, kind of where the Rite Aid store is now. And it was a paint business, paint and wallpaper business. And I can tell you, if you have a West Pittston home, and most of our homes were built well before 1950, your home probably at some point had Barritt's paint or wallpaper applied to it, because everyone in the area used Barritt's for their painting and papering. Around between 1910 and 1913, they moved to this much nicer home on Broad Street, and he at that point was finishing up his grade school studies. And for high school, his parents sent him along to the Bellefonte Academy down in central Pennsylvania. And that's an image of the Bellefonte Academy. So he did go there for several years, and that's where he graduated. After completing his high school years, Barritt went to the Philadelphia Academy and studied art. This building, of course, is still there. Fantastic, beautiful building designed by Frank Furness. And he studied there for, I believe it was just a short time. I don't think he took a full 4-year course. I think it was just maybe a single course or two, because he studied so many different places in a short amount of time. I believe it was just, maybe 1 or 2 classes. But he did study at this place, and then after that he entered the Academy of Fine Arts in New York. So he traveled to New York. He won a scholarship over 400 other students to the Academy in New York. And one of his artworks was actually featured in their annual catalog. While he was in Philadelphia and New York, he routinely entered competitions that were sponsored by John Wanamaker from the department store, and he won a prize over 850 other artists in that time period. And he was still just a young man, probably about 18 or 19, and that's a picture of Wanamaker's store from that era. So he was doing really well. His painting, The Old Man of the Street, I haven't been able to find a copy of it, but that was the painting that won. Then he went to New York and studied at the Chase School of Art. And the interesting thing about that was, anybody know the fellow in that picture on the left? Pardon? Rockwell, Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell also studied at the Chase School of Art. And at some point he studied, even though they were very close in age, only about 4 years apart, at some point it's been mentioned that Barritt studied under Rockwell. So not sure if he was a graduate assistant perhaps at Chase, but somehow they connected at either in New York or Philadelphia, because they both were in similar places at a similar time. And Rockwell was also famous for painting subjects, people that he knew, people from around town, and I think that was fairly common, but also where Barritt got the idea of doing that. In 1918, we're in the middle of World War I, and the newspapers locally here had put out a plea for skilled men to serve in various positions, was how it was printed. And Barritt enlisted as a chauffeur, which is an interesting position to have as a military person, but that's what he was doing. After a while, he was working up in an army hospital up in New York State, and after a while they discovered his art ability and his skills, and they discharged him from his current position, and he was transferred down to Washington, D.C. to work in army hospitals with, I guess, soldiers who, almost art therapy, I would guess, is what it was. So he was working there, but it seems that he was a civilian at that point. In 1920, he was married to a Virginia woman, Sinclair Westbrook. I assume he met Sinclair when he was in Washington, and they became engaged and got married, and moved into, when they came back to West Pittston, they moved into his grandfather's family home, this home. And if it looks a little bit familiar to you, this is what it looks like today on the corner of Susquehanna and Philadelphia Avenue. It's 1200 Susquehanna, used to be 600, but the numbers have changed over the years. And his grandfather built this home. His grandfather, in 1890, I believe it was, his grandfather built that home. So it was the family homestead. He moved in there with his wife, and needed to supplement his income at that point. Art wasn't quite enough to support him, so he began working as the manager of the Buick dealership in Pittston.
Oh.
Now it's 1922, and automobiles are really only about 20 years old at that point, and not everybody had a car. But he worked there for a while. Eventually, after about 2 or 3 years, he left the dealership. The dealership actually moved over to Luzerne Avenue here in town at one point, but he was no longer associated with the company by then. 1925, he started to focus more on his art as a career, and he worked in his father's paint store in Pittston. Now I just put that little photo of the Rite Aid up there because that's the general location that the paint store was early on. And it was called the Green Front Paint Store. And not only did they sell house paints, they also sold art supplies. I think that was probably added as something that Carlyle pushed him to do, but he helped manage the paint store in Pittston. And eventually he opened up a second Barritt's paint store in Kingston in, I believe it was this building right here,
We're getting
West
closer.
Side Cut
Getting
building.
closer.
That was his second paint store. And he primarily managed that, and his father handled the one in Pittston. And now we have some children coming along. They had 3 children over the years. The first one was Westbrook, named after his wife's maiden name, and that was 1921. The second son, Carlyle Robert. Remember, he's Robert Carlyle. The son was Carlyle Robert. He was born in 1926, and in 1930 they had a daughter who was named Joan. And she would soon become the subject of his artwork. He painted her a lot. Tragedy strikes, 1926. Within 4 to 5 months, both of their stores have very bad fires. The one in Pittston was really devastating. It pretty much destroyed the building. And they claim it started in the back where all the paints and varnishes were stored, which that would make sense.
Oh, right.
And the same thing happened in the Kingston building. That was also a storeroom fire. But they were able to save that building. The Pittston building was a loss, and the Pittston firemen were credited in saving the 2 other buildings on either side, because it was not an easy fire to fight. So the 1930s, he was able to spend more time on his artwork, and he was exhibiting locally, and also in Allentown and Philadelphia, and sometimes New York as well. There's a nice list here of paintings that he did that were exhibited in 1930 along the Lehigh at Thornhurst, the Susquehanna River, Betty, obviously someone he knew, Hilltop, and then some other people, Mrs. Freed, Mrs. Watson. So these are just some interesting titles of his paintings. Unfortunately, for as many paintings as he has supposedly done, I have not been able to locate images of very many of them. The one in the middle, Corporal John D. Stark, if that name sounds familiar to you, John Stark, pardon?
Stark Hall at Wilton.
Oh, I'm not sure if that's part of that or not. I'll have to research that. John D. Stark was the first fellow from West Pittston who was killed in World War I. And our local American Legion chapter was named for him, the John D. Stark, and in fact his name is still on the building on Linden Street. This painting was done as a gift to the American Legion when they opened that building in the 1920s. And apparently it hung there for a long time, but it's not there anymore. And when the building was emptied out, apparently it wasn't there. So I'm not sure if it ended up with the family or with, who knows. I mean, he lived just a block away down the street here on the corner of Exeter Avenue and Linden Street. And there's a good chance the painting ended up with the family at some point. But that's one of the things I'm looking to find. Where is this? And then this young woman here, she was painted a lot. This particular picture is called The Red Hat, and I truly wish it was in color. But she was a girl who he painted with some frequency. So I'm guessing she was someone from our town that, I don't know who she was though.
Oh.
This painting, I'm not sure of the title of it, but I'm looking at that. I know he painted and studied in New Hope, and that's gotta be a New Hope scene. It just has that look with the canal and then the river over to the right. So I'm guessing this is a painting that he did down in New Hope. Carlyle's granddaughter, she would have been the daughter of his second son, the first son, Westbrook. And her name is Winnie Walsh. I'm thinking she's still around. I read a piece that she published back in 2014, and she apparently holds a huge collection of Barritt's paintings. She's got them all over her house. She said that she knows that he's painted thousands of pictures, literally thousands. And to the point where he would paint, he would work all day at the paint store, and they would come home at night and paint with this, late into the night, with this feverish pace. Sometimes he didn't bother to prime his canvases because he was in such a hurry. And what has happened is that here we are, maybe 100 years later, 70, 80 years later, many of these paintings are starting to deteriorate because they were not primed, and the paint is just starting to chip off the canvases. I know of one in particular that is doing that. But Winnie recalls him painting her when she was a young girl, and she has that painting. And she said he didn't often find it easy to paint children because they would fidget a lot, so he painted from photos of them instead. And he insisted that they don't wear their dress clothes. He wanted them in their everyday clothes because he thought it brought out their personalities a lot better. One of the paintings in Winnie's collection is a painting of Phyllis Popple Argenio, who worked at Barritt's paint store. This is Bill, it's your aunt.
And Chipper.
And yes, she was a frequent subject of his, apparently. And the one picture that Winnie has is known as the twins because he painted her twice on the same canvas. Do you know anything more about that?
Lauren said she thinks that might be in Wyalusing somewhere. And
Oh,
that
this
she doesn't have
article
a lot
said
of-
it was that his granddaughter owns it.
Okay.
We could find out. Maybe we can locate her at some point. But I don't know if he painted her side by side twice, or if he painted her once and then painted over it a second time. So I'm not sure. I couldn't find any explanation on that. But she is supposedly in the collection of his granddaughter. She owns other paintings of store employees, and just again using people that he knew a lot.
Could I say something now?
Sure.
My mother always told me that he painted her, she sat for him to paint her portrait that was used for, I think, U.S. savings bonds in the war.
Oh, interesting.
And she remembers these posters in business windows.
With her picture.
Yes, but
Oh
I don't
my!
have
And you
it.
don't have an
I don't
image
know
of
where
that.
it could be,
Oh, how
but
fantastic!
maybe, I could.
That's really
Contact this
interesting to
person.
know. Well, if
Yeah.
maybe we can do some research
she had
and see if that's
classic
a way.
features,
Mhm.
and when they do a portrait, they want
Mhm.
it to look like that.
Wow,
But,
that's amazing.
She's passed away now too, so.
Oh,
But
And
If I could find out more, I'd sure.
do you know where she would have gone to be painted?
She lived in Pittston.
Mm-hmm.
She was in Pittston, Catherine Rader,
Okay.
and I guess it just happened that way. I don't know.
Wow. I know he did a lot of painting at home, and I just wondered if he had people come into his house and sit
It had
for
to be a
art.
portrait, I guess,
Mhm.
since posters were made from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could find one of those posters. There's got to be an image
Yeah.
someplace.
I don't know. They got just chucked away.
Yeah,
Thrown away after
yeah.
a while.
Wow. That see, this is why
Isn't that
it's interesting.
interesting?
It really is. Winnie, because the painting, many of her paintings were also deteriorating because of the priming issue that I had mentioned. She was able to find a fellow down in the Virginia area who did the restoration on her artworks, and she said she hired him to do one painting because he was highly recommended. And when she took the painting to him, she was a little concerned because he looked like a metalhead kind of a guy, and she wasn't sure what to expect. And I guess she said she gave him one of the landscapes, something that was not so meaningful to her. She didn't want to give him her family portraits just yet, and it came back so beautifully done. He truly understood Barritt's color palette, and he didn't paint over Barritt's work. He just kind of filled in where it was chipping away. And she said they came out so beautifully that she let him do all the rest of the portraits in her collection that were in bad shape. So that's a good thing. He always painted his signature in red, bright red, and he used his first name Robert, but he shortened it ROBT period. So it was ROBT period Carlyle Barritt. And she says he rarely dated them, but mine is dated. So I feel honored that it was dated. And the other thing that Winnie mentioned was that he always made the frames himself. Now, I have a confession. When I got this painting, I looked at that frame and I thought, oh, that's a really bad frame on that picture. So I promptly took it out of the frame with the intention of reframing it. And then I was doing my research and found this article, and I thought, oh wow, that's the frame he intended to have it in. So I'm torn at this point. Do I leave it in that? Do I take it out of that? I don't know. I have to make a decision. So I quick popped it back in just for tonight's presentation so that you could see one of his original frames as well. So he had to be a busy guy if he was painting and framing too. And her description was that he liked paintings framed with wood that had wormholes and a lighter wash, which is exactly what that is. So that's what he intended. So I don't know. I'll have to see how I do with that. I don't know who this young woman is, but there she is. And that would be a picture of him working. It's not very clear, but it's the best one I could find. And this one of a local breaker, originally I looked at that with the mountains and I thought maybe it was Stevens or Clear Spring, but it's not either one of those. So if anyone recognizes what breaker that is, I have to do some looking around to see if I can find that out.
Billy Best. Billy Best.
Yeah, Bill would know. I'll send it to Bill. And another unknown person, but it's a nice example of a portrait that he did. Obviously someone well off, I think. He has a pretty fancy suit on and some jewelry. I don't know, perhaps it's a family member. And this was interesting. I found this in the newspapers from 1943. He was encouraging people to have their military sons and so forth painted as a, just something to remember them with. And it has his address on there, and that you're supposed to contact him if you want to have your military member painted. And he apparently did hundreds of those. And once again, where are they?
Right.
Where are they?
It's amazing. You can't find Carolina.
Isn't it? It's just astounding to me. Does anybody recognize this? In the Methodist Church. This is it's huge, very big. This is in the Methodist Church, and then there again is his signature, 1950. Barritt was commissioned to paint this in memory of William Russell Barnhart, and he was killed during World War II, 1943, and his parents commissioned Carlyle Barritt to do this painting. And it's, you know, I saw this painting for years and years and years and never really looked at the signature on it or that brass plate. And one day I was over there for a meeting or something, and I just happened to look at it and was, oh my goodness, it's a Barritt. So it's called The Good Shepherd, and it's in that back room at the Methodist Church if you ever go over there for an event, or it's right in the back room on Wyoming Avenue. And they said that the painting was presented in an elaborate dedication service that took place at the church, and it featured a Naval Reserve color guard. There's also one, and unfortunately I can't get a picture of it, right across the street in this church, the former Presbyterian church. There is a painting of the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's one that Barritt did. I'm not sure if it's older or newer than this, but it is in that church, and the status of it, I have no idea, because it went with the church, and the church isn't really open at this time. And there's the one that I have up there. It's a New England scene, not sure exactly where. And then this one, the Signal Knob mural. In the later 50s, Mrs. Barritt wasn't too fond of our winters here in northeastern Pennsylvania, so they started to spend the winters down in Virginia, where she was from. And during his time down there, he ended up getting a commission from a bank, and this was painted on the wall in a bank. It's the first bank in Strasburg, Virginia, and this was painted in 1960. It's 10 by 24 feet, so it's pretty good size, and it depicts a scene in that area. And eventually, Carlyle sold his home up here in West Pittston, and he sold it to another name that you might know, Sidney Darby, who was a commercial artist in the area. And
Channel 22.
Pardon?
Channel 22.
Oh.
Did all the artwork for Channel 22.
Oh, that I didn't know.
Yeah.
That I didn't know. I mean, I know he did sign painting for all the businesses in this area. And he actually was my neighbor when I was very young. I don't
was
really
his
remember him
paperboy.
too well. Okay, well, yeah, because you were right across the street, so you must remember him well. So Sidney Darby lived in that house for a good many years, and then at that point Barritt moved to Virginia permanently, and he passed away in 1979 and is buried down in Virginia. But it's my desire to find out where some of this artwork is, because it's, for someone who painted so much, there has to be a lot more of it around somewhere. And perhaps people have these paintings and don't really know what they are, so who knows. Our next artist is Charles Zimmerman, and I'm so fortunate to have these ladies here because they have actually known Mr. Zimmerman in his later years. You studied, he taught some classes. You're all from the Art League?
No.
No,
I
just
was
took
the one
classes.
in the corner.
Oh,
I
just
was,
this woman.
yeah.
Okay.
There should be more there, I don't know.
And you know him from the Art League?
Oh, yes, very
Yes,
well, very
that's
well. He was
fantastic.
quite the character.
Mr. Zimmerman, I got the impression from everything I learned about him that he was a simple man, that he didn't live a fancy lifestyle.
No.
And he said that he lived right on Washington Street behind the Moose Building.
He lives with his sister, didn't
His cousin.
A cousin.
And guess who his cousin was? Myra Cushel was his cousin. She's a West Pittston name because she taught in the high school for many years. So a lot of people know that name. but he was born and lived in that house his entire life. He never married, and he said when he was young he wasn't wealthy enough to marry, and by the time he got some money he was too old to get married. So that was his little thing about that. He was the son of Charles and Eunice Barritt Zimmerman. His father worked at the Exeter Machine Shop, which eventually became the Glen Alden shops up here along the railroad tracks. And of course, many of those old buildings still exist. The newspapers, that was his home, right behind the moose. The newspapers document him frequently calling the police about loud parties at the Moose Building. He was the class of 1918 at West Pittston High School. This is a 17 picture, but it was the closest one I had, so you could at least get an idea of what kids looked like back then. And after that, he moved to Washington for some time and studied at the Corcoran School of Art. He passed his civil service exam and registered for World War I, also, like Barritt did. His occupation was listed as a government clerk on his, we aren't sure if he was actually called to serve, but he did register. And of course, here is a scene from the Corcoran School. And later, after he finished at the Corcoran School, he moved to New York City for some time, and he worked as a commercial artist at Macy's. And I'm guessing he was doing newspaper advertisements and whatnot, and perhaps some commercial work there. But that's what he did for a period of time. And he moved back to West Pittston and really started focusing on his artwork, exhibiting locally a lot, doing private lessons and apparently group lessons as well. And this is an exhibit that he did right here at the West Pittston Library. We have Beverly Williams and Joan Linsky on the left, and let's see, Mrs. Davis, who are those others? It doesn't say, there's a lot of names listed, but it doesn't say. Oh, Mrs. Richard Jones, Mrs. Joseph Floyd. Of course, women didn't have first names in those days, if you remember. Everybody went by their husband's names. Mrs. Helen Dietrich on the very right. Helen was herself a very accomplished artist and has done some beautiful artwork, and I think I would like to include her in a program one day too. But he did a lot of exhibiting locally. And this is one that he exhibited at the Art League. The River in Winter won the Grumbacher Gold Medal Award, and I will show you a better image of that in a moment here. When you see this, you'll look at that and you'll say, I know that scene.
Sunset. Yeah.
Candle sledge there in the background. I think this was done from a view in the West Pittston Cemetery. As close as I can tell, that's where it was taken. So he liked to paint his local scenes with some frequency. This one, I heard you ladies talking about this.
Yeah.
This painting was done in, I believe it was 1955. This image coming off the Market Street Bridge in Wilkes-Barre, and then in 92, Sally Teller-Loddick, a local historian, chose this painting for the cover of her book on our Wyoming Valley history. And that's her down in the corner there. It's probably in this library. If I looked around, I could probably find a copy of it. He was well known for florals. Roses? Okay, all right, well, you have first-hand knowledge.
He
You have
loved
first-hand
roses.
knowledge. And roses are not always easy, so
No.
good for him. And this one, which we have here, I'm gonna hold this up shortly. This is a scene taken from the Jenkins Bridge towards Pittston, and you can see the old American Theater that is no longer there on the right. All of these buildings in the background that have been removed. The church spires are still there, and St. Catherine's is on the left. I love this painting. This is a very nice piece. And he died in 1994 and is buried in the West Pittston Cemetery. But his artworks are around the area a lot. They're in the Wells Collection at King's. The Buck Hill Inn has at least one of his pieces, and of course the West Pittston Library has this one. And I think we are very grateful to have these two fantastic artists from our town, and I love the local pictures that they've done. They just kind of evoke some nice memories. She's not. Kendra? Let me see. Yeah, we just want the lights on, and I don't know where the switch is. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about either?
I have one comment that we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one additional artist of note who happened to be a relative of mine,
Okay.
to my dad, for 6 months to a year.
Mm-hmm.
He and his mom moved in with my father's parents on, I believe, Maple Street or.
Okay, so he lived in
Philadelphia.
town with them.
It was Franz
Klein. Mm-hmm.
Franz Klein, and they moved to Lehigh.
And I've tried to connect him to this area. I mean, to West Pittston specifically.
That was a family story that was passed down
Yeah,
for
yeah.
years. And
But
as a
you are
young-
related. Do you know how you're related?
His mother and my grandfather Rowe were
On the Rowe
brothers.
side, okay.
Somehow on that election, but they spent time here, then they moved to Lehigh. And before he got into his abstract phase,
Mm-hmm.
he did do a portrait of my dad that we would love to just know where it's at. But
Isn't that amazing?
we
Like,
believe it's in
where
a
is
private
it?
collection.
Yeah.
We believe it's in a private collection somewhere. A lot of his art is in private collections.
Right,
in-
right, or
in
museums.
California.
Mm-hmm.
The Allentown Museum of Art did a presentation of his artwork, and he did have a brother named Fred who lived in New Jersey for some time. My dad stayed in contact with, but Fred was a bit younger than Franz. quite a
Okay,
bit younger than
and he was
Franz.
not into
And
art
again,
though.
This is all stuff that,
Here-
I heard
yeah.
when I was.
Stories
my
passed
dad
down.
passed in 1968,
Mm-hmm.
and so I never got to find out an awful lot about it.
Sure?
When I worked at the West Side Bank years ago, I was teller. I used to wait on Mr. Zimmerman all the time.
Oh,
Very distinguished, and he had white hair and those horn-rimmed glasses, tall and erect, thin. And we had a painting by him. I always remember the
Ooh.
rose, still life roses in the bank. I always admired that
Oh,
painting.
yeah.
It was
Pink.
like an aqua background with pink
Pink,
roses.
yeah, that's
I don't
what
know whatever happened to that
couldn't
painting.
read that when I was younger. Oh,
We used to
I
have
had
different
two
exhibits
little
too
kids.
periodically.
yeah,
at
I
West Side
remember
Bank.
the bank
And he
had
used to
art
exhibit
exhibits
there.
all the time.
And I remember
I
admiring
still
his work. He
think
had a lot
of
of
it.
still lifes at
I
that point.
could have had
But
it.
they were absolutely
Coulda
beautiful,
had
but I
it.
don't know what happened to that painting. I always admired it.
I have a whole list of things that I read about in the old newspapers or that I know existed, and it's like, I just want to start like a where is it kind of
Where
thing,
is it?
you know?
That would be neat.
Wow.
Tony, maybe we need to do a column on that, huh?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
with pictures of things, where is it?
Well,
Yeah,
his paintings were usually offered for sale. You know, when he
Right.
exhibited them, they'd have a price on them.
Mhm,
You could have
mhm.
bought it,
mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
know, if you
They
had
were
money
pricey
to.
when he'd exhibit. I always admired a lot of their,
Yeah,
back in the day, they were pretty expensive, but they were beautiful.
yes, they
Yeah.
were at that time.
They were well worth the money. I couldn't afford them at the time, but
I
his
couldn't
paintings were
either,
absolutely
yeah.
gorgeous.
I had two little kids, I couldn't buy a painting.
We
I-
lament, my sister and I lament that
That you never,
Franz Klein never requested
No.
a painting us that
paint
we,
you?
you know, we'd be living quite well now with
Wow.
one of those go for.
Wow, interesting.
Oh, yeah, Clyde.
Any other questions? Yes.
I was just gonna say, how much are these paintings worth? Like if you were to go to an antique shop and find one.
Well, I'll tell you what I
know.
paid for mine. I paid $36 for mine on eBay. But I know they sell for a lot more than that. When I was doing my research, I found some that sold for about $500 to $600 in
Is that the
auction,
subject?
online auctions. I'm not sure why this one wasn't
Isn't
going.
there one
It's not
story
a
that
heck of a lot.
in central Pennsylvania, a fellow found one of the 7 original Declaration of Independences behind a painting and paid like $5 for it.
Yep. When I was in college, one of the girls in my art classes had found a piece of artwork in her grandmother's attic, and it looked like something she had seen in an art ed class or an art history class, and she took it, brought it, and had the art history staff look at it, and they confirmed that this painting ended up being worth about, I don't know, $70,000-$80,000, and that was in the 1970s. So, you know, you just don't know what you have, you know. So it's good to go up in the attic once in a while and look around. I just think it's to me, these fellows were both so well trained in art, and they still both chose to come back to our area and paint and educate artists in this area as well. And I think they made a mark on the area.
So what would you call, this one was Pennsylvania Impressionist. What was the other man?
Well, if you look closely, you can see that Barritt used a little bit thicker technique. I mean, this is a very realistic, almost illustrative type of a painting. Let me hold this up so you can see it a little bit better.
Need help, Mary?
Yeah, I think I got it. I just wanna put it where, if you get on one side. And he only wants, there's a ribbon on the back, we can show them the back too. He only won second prize for this one.
Would that be a Pennsylvania Impressionist?
I have to research more into that style, cause I had never even heard of that style, but this is the back, and he has a newspaper clipping of the scene. And down here it says something about the varnish that he used on the painting, and if there's any problems with it, you have to call this woman, and her phone number is on here. And then there's his ribbon from, what is that, from the Burritt Arts and Crafts Center. So someone down in Burritt was painting a little bit better than him.
It hangs daily in the library.
Once daily in the library.
Yeah, this is beautiful, I do like this one a lot.
Okay.
Thank you, Claire.